All right, we got a goodie tonight. Um, Consider yourself lucky, was ever on. We are ending the first chapter of Hilchas Talmud Torah, where the Rambam, just as a quick review, is going over, at least for this perek, those people who are obligated in learning, those people who are not so obligated in learning. That's one discussion. And the last discussion we had was with the Rambam in number 11. And Halacha Yud Aleph gives us the famous compromise in how to split up your time, right? He said that you do a third, a third, a third. Okay, a third Torah Shebechsav, a third Torah Shebal Peh, and the third, what he calls Gemara. Okay, so let's do Yud Beis. Okay, let's see how this translates into the world, into the practical world. So the Gemara, so the Rambam says Ketzad. So let's take an example. So the Rambam's going to work on a 24-hour day, and he's going to break it up into basically 12 hours and 12 hours. So he says the 12 hours that you're up and working or have time, he says that's when you should be working slash learning. So he says Hayabal Umnus, assuming you were working. Once again, the Rambam for the millionth time references the importance of working. So if you were in the office, I always found this very interesting, or actually humorous, because the Rambam says, let's say you work 3 hours a day. So that means you have an extra 9 hours to learn Torah. How does he get that? Because there are 12 hours of the day, it's 12 and 12, right? Now, previous Rambams have taught us that he's very into, working out and exercising and sleeping and eating and relaxing, right? So in the world of the Rambam, there were about 12 hours where you would do, things like that. Sleeping, let's say he says you sleep 8 hours. And in the other 4 hours, you spend, doing chores and relaxing and TV a little bit and some sport activities and traffic and carpool. And when you add up all those hours, you're kind of like around 12 hours. So that gives you 12 hours left. So let's say between, I don't know, 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. So your job was 3 hours. Now, I don't know what world the Rambam was living in. Maybe some dentist in Israel who has 3 hours a day to work. But for most people, I doubt they're working 3 hours a day. However, let's just live in the world of the Rambam. He says in those 12 hours that you're up and running, so you have 3 hours of working. So that leaves you 9 hours a day of learning, right? Wow, look at that. That's a dream. That is an absolute dream. So how do you, right? So your biggest problem in life now, right? Assuming you won the Mega Millions, is how do I divide up these 9 hours into learning? Okay, so says the Rambam, Teisha Koreh B'Shalosh, right? So Osan HaTeisha Koreh B'Shalosh Mehen B'Torah Shebechsav, B'Shalosh B'Torah Shebal Peh, B'Shalosh Acheros Mizbonen B'Daito Lahaven Davar Mitoch Davar. So basically, you do three, Chumash, let's call it, three of Torah Shebal Peh, which let's just call Mishnah, okay, for simplicity. And the last three are understanding things within things, which is another way of saying probably Gemara. Okay, so there's your three, three, and three. Now the Rambam qualifies, and I will admit it's a little confusing the way he describes it, but he says v'divrei Kabbalah b'chlal Torah shebechsavhen. So he lays down the rule, and it's very important to understand. He uses the word Kabbalah. Kabbalah is not like Madonna's Kabbalah and Hollywood's Kabbalah. This is, Divrei Kabbalah is the term that we use for like Halacha L'Moshe Sinai, or what we would call tradition, Masorah, right? Things that we learn that get passed down, like a Gzeira Shava, goes from one generation to the next generation. So all of that, the way we interpret psukim, is called Torah Shebichsav. Okay? Or let's just call it, when you learn Chumash with Mefarshim, like the Sforno and the Ramban and the Ibn Ezra, right, and all the favorite, right, all of our classic commentators that we get on the bottom of Sefaria. So all of those would probably be called Divrei Kabbalah because they're commentaries and, traditions that get passed on from generation to generation. That's at least the way I would interpret it. Upeirushan bichlal Torah sheba'al peh. And the explanation of the written law, right, that is considered Torah sheba'al peh or the Mishnah, right? Because what the Mishnah does, it gives laws, basic laws without machlokes, that's primarily based on psukim, right? Like the first Mishnah in Psachim, Orla Basar, Botkin Sachametz, Lower Haner, right? So that Mishnah, now, B'dika Sachametz is not, specifically mentioned in the Chumash, but we have a reference to Bal Yirah, Bal Yamatzeh, right? So, an explanation of Bal Yirah, Bal Yamatzeh is a Mishnah in Psachim. So that's what we call Perusha Mechal Tosha Peh, V'hanyanim hanikram Pardes B'chal Gemorhen. Then we have something called Pardes, right? Pardes is the esoteric and obscure laws that, now Pardes actually stands for Pshat Remez Drush Sod. It's basically it's like the next extension of the Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's not just a Mishnah that gives you laws. It goes on, and it darshans letters, and it includes this, and it includes that, and it involves machlokas between Abaya and Rava on how you learn a certain pasuk, stuff like that, that if you're into Daf Yomi or you've been around the block in the Talmud, you would know that is classical Talmud. Okay, so that's what the Rambam says. Then he gives a big fat qualifier, and he says, Bamedvar Mamurim, when is everything true what I said? B'tchilas Talmuda Shal Adam. This is, I guess, his first stages. He doesn't give a specific year, but, as you get older and more mature and you go from yeshiva to here, to there, to there, not like today, where it basically ends after your year in Israel, assuming that assuming that this becomes your life, the Rambam says, so your first several years, you're a beginner, right? Like it's the green slopes, as they say. So when you're a beginner, this is the way that you should go. But as you grow older and wiser, when you don't need to review Chumash Rashi anymore, because you kind of know it, right? And you don't even need to review Mishnayos anymore. You should, once in a while, right, just, read some psukim. That's nice, to be yotzezan, as they say in Yiddish. B'divrei shmua, k'dei shel yishkach davar m'divrei Torah. Just so that you remember the psukim, that's great. But what should you spend the most time concentrating on? V'yifne kol yamav le'gemara bilvad, lefi rochav sheyesh belibo v'yishav daito. You should focus all of your attention and energy on just Gemara for your whole life, according to what you could understand and your ability to concentrate. And the Mefarshim explain, I think I saw in the Kesef Mishnah or the Lecha Mishnah, that this is really, this is what we rely on, that Gemara in Sanhedrin that talks about you really only need Talmud Bavli, because Talmud Bavli includes everything. It includes Chumash, it includes Torah Shebech, it includes Mishnayos, it includes Gemara. So there's your what they call your all-in-one. So that's what the Kesef Mishnah over here explains, and that's really the way that we do today in our yeshiva system, where it's really, really, like, as they say, Gemara-centric, It's very, very heavy, skewed to time in Gemara verse, Mishnah by itself or Chumash by itself. It's not really, those aren't stressed because it's, in my opinion, it's assumed that the children know the Chumash before they get to yeshiva, but I'm not going to talk about how wrong everybody is about that point because no one really knows anything. But I don't want to sound so cynical, so we're going to move to number Yud Gimel, to 13. It's a shame to spend 4 minutes on this because this Yud Gimel is, there are books written about these next 6 lines, much controversy, and 4 minutes is an injustice to do it, but we'll attempt to do it, and we'll see what time we finish, because the Rambam ends off the first chapter with a bang. He's going to talk about women now, okay? And if you remember how he started the perek, he basically said the first word of this perek and of this book is nashim, right? He starts to focus on those who are exempt. Remember, he said those who are exempt from learning are women, slaves, and ktanim, and males under 13. So now he's going to focus on women, for example. So he says, Isha shalom da Torah, yesh la schar, aval eno k'schar ish. So granted, women are exempt from learning Torah, okay, but what if they do learn Torah? So the Rambam says, okay, it's a nice thing. They get what we call schar, aval eno k'schar ha'ish. But in the scorecard in Shamayim, it has a little bit of an asterisk, like when Maris hit his 61. So there was a whole debate. Who was the Buey Kuhn? Was that the commissioner then in 1961? I think that was his name, who decided to put an asterisk because he played 161 games and Babe Ruth played 154 games, right? So therefore, that's the famous asterisk that took many, many decades to get rid of. So that's kind of the way it works when a woman learns Torah. There's an asterisk, meaning it doesn't count as much had she been a man. Okay? Now, again, just remember, I'm just reporting over here. I'm telling you what the Rambam says. And the reason why is mipnei shelo nitztaves, because she was not commanded. Meaning, we had Gzeros HaKasuv that said, V'l'maratem is b'nechem, v'lo is b'nosechem, right? So women are exempt. So therefore, if you're not commanded to do something, you will not get the reward as if you were commanded. And the Rambam jumps to the next conclusion, and he says, V'chol ha'osa davar she'enu mitzuveh, alav la'soso ein schar k'schar ha'mitzuveh she'asa, ela pachos mimenu. Interesting. So he basically quotes, I think there's like 8 Gemaras that basically say, mitzvah v'oseh, right? We all know this, that you get less of a reward if you don't have the commandment, right? The Gemara talks about it, Bava by Rav Yosef, who was blind. It talks about by women. It has many, many contexts. Ela pachas mimenu. You get a little bit less. And there's many, many reasons. I'll just give you the most famous reason that Tosfos 5 times in Shas repeats himself. He says the reason is because it has to do with your Yetzer. If you're commanded to get up in the morning and daven, and it's 5 degrees outside, right? Your Yetzer Hara is saying, I have a commandment to do it, but I don't want to go. So you fight that Yetzer Hara and you overcome it. Wow. But if you're not commanded, there's no drive for you to wake up in the morning and go out. There's no counter pressure. There's no evil inclination telling you, stay home, you don't have to go. Because there's no pressure on the other side telling you to go because you're not commanded. That, in a real nutshell, is one of the many, many reasons why, or the most famous reason, why mitzvah v'oseh is much more on a higher level than Eina Mitzvah V'oseh. Okay, now's not the time to talk about it. He's only bringing it vis-a-vis the woman. Okay, so now that the Rambam said that, he's going to get into more hot water, at least by today's standards, because he's going to say, V'afal pi sheyesh la schar, even though you do have that asterisk, as we'll call it, the Roger Maris asterisk, still, tzivu chachamim shelo yelamed adam es bito Torah. Nevertheless, one thing we would not like you to do is to teach your own daughter Torah. Wow, this is hard to swallow. What's the problem with women today or girls? I don't want to sound like Archie Bunker, but I will anyway, because he says, the Rambam says that most women cannot, I'm just reading it, ein datan mechuvanot litlamed. Okay? They can't concentrate, they don't have kavanah, they can't concentrate on their teaching. Elehen motzion divrei Torah ledivrei havai. What they do is they take the words of the Torah and they transform it into divrei havai. The word havai means several things. It means exaggeration. It means different things in different contexts, but it means also nothingness. Okay, so they take something and they are motzi it for something that's lebatala. So the question is, why do they do this? Why do they, according to the Rambam at least, why do they take what they learn and ruin it? Let's just use that word, lefi aniyat daitan. Because they have what they called aniyat daitan. They have lack of understanding. Okay, they don't understand. So therefore, if they hear something and then they repeat it, right? They repeat the wrong thing because they're not absorbing the material properly. Okay, so that's the problem today with girls or older girls, young women who learn Torah and don't understand it. They I don't want to say bastardize, that's a bad word, but they just manipulate it. Let's just use that word. Politically correct word, manipulate. Amru chachamim, kol hamalamed as bito Torah ki'ilo limda tiflus. Okay, so just when you thought that the Rambam couldn't get any more into hot water, here he enters the Tiflus world. What is Tiflus? That is a great question. So everybody interprets it differently. Tiflus, according to Safaria, is tales and parables. Okay, when you open up the Shulchan Aruch, the word Tiflus, according to the Shulchan Aruch, is Devar Avera. Because the Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh De'ah, Reish Mem Vav, quotes this Rambam almost verbatim. Okay, and he says Tiflus is Dvar Avera. It goes from a good thing to a sin. So therefore, you shouldn't teach your daughter Tiflus. And this is related to the famous Gemara in Sota Daf Chaf Aleph. That's where this comes from. Again, the Rambam, I said 1,000,000 times, takes 98% of everything from the Gemara. This is the famous Gemara that talks about the Sota, and that sometimes it's good for the Sota to know a little bit of Torah because it could help her. It could postpone her verdict and not blow up right away. Without getting into it, we're already running overtime, but I'm sure we all know at least Sota Daf Chaf Aleph, if nothing else. So that's the opinion of the Rambam. So therefore, right, you shouldn't teach your daughter Torah because it's like teaching her Tiflus, Narishkeit, sin, made up things. Okay. Now, what kind of Torah are we forbidden to teach our daughters? So the Rambam says it's called only Torah Sheba'al Peh. Torah Shebechsav is much more difficult to manipulate for the girl than Torah Sheba'al Peh, because Torah Shebechsav is a little bit more easier to understand. You don't need that dot. Now, the Rambam said, what's the problem with women is that daitan kalos. Okay? Now, the big question is, hold on, doesn't the Gemara need to say that women were given bina yisera, right? And an extra way of understanding things? So again, it's already 8:20. We're running overtime, but you could get that answer yourself how does that Gemara in Nida, I forgot what daf it is, I think daf Lamed or so, how does that Gemara jive with this Rambam over here, or with this Gemara in Sota, that on the one hand, Nashim Daitan Kalos, but on the other hand, they have a Bina Yisera. So they're somewhere in the middle. Okay, you got to go to Bravenders to answer that question. But anyway, so the Rambam ends off by saying, the Rambam says, thank God, we'll save the day, we'll end on a high note, that it's not the end of the world if you teach your girls Torah Shebechsav, because that is not considered tiflis. Okay. We got to end here. This is too much. All right. Have a good night, everyone.